Hello, I am Michele Leclaire, Director at Buckham Gallery. Today, I am joined by Deepanjan Mukhopadhyay, whose exhibition, Appropriated Figure Grounds, is on view through March 20. In addition to visiting the physical gallery, his work may be viewed online on our website, buckhamgallery.org. First, I would like to say thank you to the individuals and organizations who support Buckham Gallery, including the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Greater Flint Arts Council Share Art, Genesee County Grant Program, made possible by the Genesee County Arts Education and Cultural Enrichment Funds, your tax dollars at work. Deepanjan Mukhopadhyay works in photography, video, installation, sculpture, and new media, investigating shifting meanings within post and neo-colonialism, while still reflecting on the very mediums of representation he uses. Deepanjan is originally from Calcutta, India, and received his MFA in photography from the University of Georgia. He currently holds the position of Professor of the Practice in Photography at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Deepanjan's work has been published in Aperture.org, Burnaway, and PDN Magazine. He has also received honors for his work from Society of Photographic Education 2015 PDN Photo Annual, and was named one of the Atlanta Celebrates Photography 2017 Ones to Watch. His work has been exhibited in India, Canada, and across the United States in galleries such as Aperture Gallery, New York, New York, and Elizabeth Hudson Gallery, New York, New York. Welcome, Deep.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me here today. So let's start with the title of your show, Appropriated Figure Grounds. Why appropriate?
Yeah, so speaking of the title, I'm often really interested in just puns. And so there's a lot of figures being appropriated, but then figure and ground relationships are also being sort of explored in the work. And at the same time, like breaking a part of a figure or grounding them, as you might see in the sort of gray pieces, which are tiny hex code or just the binary data in hexadecimal format of Twitter images of certain personalities. So I think because of all of that, I decided to name this Appropriated Figure Grounds, and just being very direct with my titling, because a lot of the work in certain ways is very direct. It's very direct in the subject matter or the images that are being used. Generally speaking, all across my art, I like to use appropriative gestures. I call appropriation a gesture, just as mark making is a gesture. And in terms of making object-based work, I use ready-mades, which are kind of appropriation. So, and when I make image-based works, I appropriate. I think the idea of appropriating serves two purposes here. One is kind of going back and looking at what this medium can do, or the tools of photography can do and has done. It's a critical investigation of the medium itself. And at the same time, using appropriation, it can also be sort of a political act of gaining agency. And in that case, you have to kind of consider who is appropriating whom. And because when we represent, the idea of who represents whom becomes important within a socioeconomic and political context. So even in the case of appropriation of that representation, it becomes important to understand who is representing whom, and then how is that representation being appropriated.
And a quick question, often when you think of appropriation, like you say, you take the image from one place to use it another way, are you manipulating them at all in your process of appropriation?
Yes, so most of these images are, I would say, not heavily manipulated, but manipulated. So a lot of the background has been taken out, and they've been made black and white. In specifically in case of the uh, images that show the back of someone's body, those images have added in motion blur, and as well some dust specks, as if it was shot with like flash photography, and it might have been raining, or there might have been dust in the air when the shot was taken. And in terms of the hex codes, those it's hard to say if they're manipulated or not, because the data itself is not manipulated, but the way the data is visualized, of course, I had to make decisions on how that data is being shown. And so right now they look like gray images from far away until you walk up to them and you see that they're hex codes.
Yeah, maybe let me see if I can zoom in on it so we can see that better. And then if you would explain a little bit what, because not everyone knows, what is a hex code? I don't know if
Yeah, it is. So the raw data of the image in zeros and ones is the raw binary data. Now, binary data, just because it uses zeros and ones, takes up a lot of character space, meaning there's a lot of zeros and ones you have to write out to write out something in its binary form. Hexadecimal is another kind of numbering system. So it's not the binary numbering system, but another form of numbering system that allows for that writing of the same binary data with less number of characters. So I had to figure out a way to use images without, again, because I'm trying to lessen how much I manipulate. I was trying to figure out what's the best images I can get as source material. So the smallest images were Twitter profile pictures because they're pretty small, and so the data contained in them is little. And then if I were to use the binary data, then they would be too small in that 30 by 30 picture frame because I'd have to fit in lots of zeros and ones. So I chose the hexadecimal format because that way, when you get close to it, you can still read some of that. But when you're farther away, it kind of meshes into gray.
Yeah, and how do you choose which, so often when work comes to the gallery, I lay it out and choose where I put, and you had a very great idea of the pairings you wanted for certain images. And can you maybe discuss a little bit about your decision-making, why you were putting like Vladimir Putin with this
That's Xi Jinping and I think Erdogan right beside.
Yes.
Yeah. So it depends on. I have had different pairings, and some of them are because of just aesthetic reasons. Having the eye flow through a certain installation space. Some of them might be because of what's going on at that political moment. So this may not be the greatest example, but pairing sort of Trump with Khamenei was the first pairing that I did when I was starting to show the work, and that was right when Iran and U.S. sort of conflicts were heating up. And so I think these pairings can change based on the socio-political context of when this work is being showed, and it can also change just based on the aesthetics of the work and how it's working in the space. Um, one other sort of pairing that is maybe a little bit more intentional in its politics is the pairing of the excerpt from Boulevard du Temple, and that is paired with Emmanuel Macron. So this was the photograph was a daguerreotype and the first made photograph of human form, I believe, in Paris, and so that is sort of paired with Macron, who's French, and his Twitter pic.
Well, it was also interesting was with the installation, because not only do you have this excerpt from this daguerreotype of the first capture of the human form on film, and then we have the back of Mark Zuckerberg, you know, the founder of Facebook, where it's people taking selfies and putting the pictures of themselves out there all the time. So I really thought that was a fascinating combination.
Yeah, I mean, even with Macron, so I had to decide between, again, I told you the reason for using the Twitter pics, which is they are the smallest amount of data that I could kind of fit in the way I wanted to within the 30 by 30 inch print. But everyone has reasons why they want to represent themselves, meaning Macron has official portraiture taken of him. And during like that is like the official portrait of Macron, which you can find out on the French government's website. Um, but yeah, but also like how do you distinguish yourself from that when you're using Twitter? Because you may, like, even a leader might want to be a little bit more casual when they're having their like Twitter profile picture. So that is something like on my end I had to negotiate, but I'm sure on the end of someone like Macron, they have to negotiate as well, like which representation they want to put in which space.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I think how we're all, you know, no matter where we're at, negotiating how we present ourselves out there in the world. Yeah. Okay, so what were your interventions when working with these source materials?
Yeah, so I spoke a little bit about that. I think the main interventions for me were to, one, isolate, meaning isolating the figures from, if there were other figures around uh, around these people. Usually these are media photographs, so photographs from the news media when it's the photograph of the people, meaning the hands and the backs. And so isolating them was number one. Number two, making them black and white was a choice that I made. And three, putting in, through digital means, putting in some artifacting that could almost look like analog photography. So this is a deliberate choice on my part to sort of what I call hijack the aesthetics of analog photography, which has always sort of been a marker for truth. There is an understanding that a photograph is true, and the more well, in today in the post-truth world, actually the less polished a photograph is, the truer it seems to be, or the truer it might feel to people. So less polished family photograph might feel more true and less manipulated than a more polished, again, official portrait. And so I was trying to hijack that sort of understanding of photography that people have when they relate to photographic aesthetics while I was making this work.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. We actually presented a very different show last July, Verisimilitude, and it was all about questioning truth likeness in photography, and when truth likeness can seem more real than the reality. It's an artifice. I don't know. And what is the relationship between your choices and your visibility and obscurity in the work?
I think for me, some of the, well, one of the things, like metaphorically, that I wanted to convey is again the choice of representation on part of these people being represented is they are definitely playing us. They are playing the media, and they know how to do it. So for them, visibility and obscurity are something that they are sort of balancing in order to gain their agency, meaning they do not want to be visible all the time, but sometimes they want to be visible, and they want to be visible on their terms. and not on our terms. And so politically, there is always this balancing invisibility and invisibility when someone is thinking about their own representation. On my end, I think there were a lot of aesthetic choices in terms of how someone views photography, um, and how photography might sort of engage one's body when viewing. So uh, there, the the read in these photographs change as you walk closer to them, or when you walk farther away from them. There are a lot of very dark tones that you kind of have to get close to the photograph to see, as well as there are some digital artifacting, which again, far away, it looks like could look like analog photography, but as you step closer, you can kind of see that the edges of the photographs or the edges of the characters are pixelated, perhaps, or there are evidence of manipulation within the work.
Because I have to,
Yeah.
when we were installing, the one my assistant and I were talking about, is kind of interesting, the shapes that you made, that you would just chose. And maybe part of that is due to the size and the shape of the physical objects. But it also, when put together in these ways, they reminded us of Tetris shapes.
Yeah, and or pixels, and the
Yes.
idea that they so the idea is that they can fit together, they can form networks, even, or they can be separated. But there is a connection between them in form for them to be ordered to fit together. Or there is this idea that they may possibly fit together. And I think that is important, or just the idea that these are pixels when you view them from far away. So those were sort of the things that I was thinking about when showing the work this way.
Yeah, it definitely comes across. So where do you kind of place yourself in your work in relationship to the history of photography and art as a whole?
Yeah. So that's thank you for asking that question, because I'm probably going to take a little bit of time answering this.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm sorry to think about is the idea of skill in photography, um, and that idea has always been there in a lot of media. But when you make work like this, it the work necessarily is not about skill. Neither is the work about seeing outside ourselves. Photography has always been a way to point at things, so that's why there's like so many hands pointing in this work. Photography has always been this idea that we explore the outside, and then within photography there has always been this talk of photographers and then artists who work with photography, as if they have to be somehow exclusive, or they have to be like binary choices someone is making when they work in photography. So I think within that space, sort of looking back into the medium is something that I'm doing. It has been something that's been done for in the last 2 or 3 decades by uh, by a lot of photographers. Even before that, I'm thinking about Christopher Williams's uh, The Production Line of Happiness, which I believe you can look up. It was in Chicago. It was a show in Chicago, and it had like a sort of book associated with the show. Um, so it's been done for a long time, but somehow the photography world is hesitant to allow this kind of work into itself, that actually calls into question the photographic apparatus itself. Like if traditionally or historically the power of photography has always been associated with pointing outwards and truth, then and also representing others, which possibly could be exploitative representation. As a person of color, I think that's really important because it's been harmful to the history of peoples like us. And so when we start questioning all of that, uh, it it there is some pushback within the broader photographic world in terms of the work we made. And there's also again this idea of perhaps appropriation does not require any skill, and therefore this may not be important. uh, I In the broader history of art, not just photography, this work is not something I would say is unique or novel. There's a lot of artists out there who have worked with appropriation and who have worked in questioning their own media. This has happened in painting since modernism,
Mhm.
like moving away from representation into the idea of just paint on canvas being painting. Uh, it has happened with photography, but it's not become mainstream as much as uh, the idea of painting about painting has become mainstream. Painters who paint about painting aren't necessarily called artists who work with painting. They're still called painters.
Mhm.
Whereas for photographers, it kind of becomes artists who work with photography instead of being
Mm.
called photographers.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. Uh, I'm also thinking there has also been a shift of how we view photography in general, and I'm coming more or less into the last decade or so. So post 9/11, there was a shift in mentality uh, in our culture about how photography works and is viewed. Slowly, I think the idea of post truth was creeping in, and and I think right now uh, post-truth is here, fortunately or unfortunately, and the contemporary audience or audiences that like anyone who's growing up in a visual or image culture right now, who has the access to the means to produce their own representation, meaning people who are making TikToks. Uh, they have the phone, they have the knowledge on how to make TikToks, and they also have the way to disseminate that their own representation. Their engagement with photography is very different from photography that sort of exists in uh, academic spaces or institutional spaces or museums, and what those kinds of photographs or photography stands for. So uh, I think we kind of have to be aware of like that photography is not the photography that anyone in high school is now thinking of when they think of as photography.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like art has to grow, and one of the hallmarks of contemporary art is being able to self-reference and grow on that. So I definitely this in our space is photography, and I'm been so
Yeah.
pleased to have it here and watching people come in. They walk into the space, and of course they have to kind of come in close to see. As you mentioned, from a distance, the images aren't always seen, and they make it in a few, and all of a sudden they realize they recognize one of the either power figures, political figures, and then they have to go back and then start again. And it's been kind of a pleasure to watch that sort of develop as the viewers come through the gallery. There was one other thing I wanted to mention. When you originally reached out to me in regards to the challenges of the sale of your work could produce, I was first, thoroughly impressed that you came up with this idea of donating a portion of the proceeds to a charity. And then again, even doubly so when you had took the time to research these like nonprofits, community-based nonprofits right here in Michigan. Do you have, is that level of sort of activism also a part of just you as a person or your work? I mean, do you want to talk about that at all? If you don't want to, I can cut all of this out and take it out.
No, sure. I do want to talk about this. I'm not, again, I'm hesitant to call myself an activist. I generally negotiate myself within very academic and elite spaces. And I have been an immigrant, and even now I'm an immigrant. So it's hard for me to put my body on the line oftentimes than not. So I do not want to call myself an activist. But speaking of selling work, some of it is just like something that's practical. I actually cannot sell work in this country at the moment, given my immigration status. But overall, I do talk on photography. Like, yes, my work is about photography, but I also do research about representation within photography as well as give talks about them. And I have been calling certain organizations who work with photography. I have been working with peers to sort of call them out and make them more, let's say, equitable and just and diverse. So I do all of that work. And to me, I think it's very important that we understand that photography doesn't just end with me taking the picture and putting it on the wall. You have to first figure out what's my subject position, whom am I representing, and then where is this work ending up in. And having said that, and having called other people out, I don't think I want to do something where, I am selling this work to gain value for myself. And that of course, I cannot stop gaining social capital by showing my work. That, you are speaking with me, I get a platform, I get a CV line. That's always going to happen. But like, what measures can I take? So that's important. Now, specifically about this work, I'm not representing outsiders, like going into someone's community and representing them. That's not happening. But still, I do want to sort of be aware or acknowledge the fact that these images were first made by news media photographers, and it is their livelihood. They work day in and day out to take these images, and I've worked in news media in the past. So I don't necessarily want to make money off of like being critical about news media. So that was the thing. And then figuring out local organizations is, again, because, again, I don't want to be an artist who comes in and shows from, like, I am not from Flint, but I don't want to be like, it can become exploitative in our practices if we end up just like, what is this show doing for the people in Flint? Just as an artist working in art organizations, I think that's like being self-aware. I guess just like the art is self-aware, just being self-aware for myself as an artist becomes important. So this is one way perhaps of kind of understanding or working through that, where, okay, at least if there's any sort of market sale happening of this work, let that go to the locality instead of even like national organizations.
Yeah, I was like I said, thoroughly impressed. So what's next? Do you have new projects you're working on that you'd like to share with us?
Yes. So I would say Appropriated Figure Grounds was almost kind of like a side project. I have a more main body of work, which is called Preposterous, and I am working on preposterous 2.0. So that body of work is, in terms of the media, it's a little bit more spread out, meaning there's images, there's objects, there's kinetic installations and sculpture and video. So I'm working on that body of work at the moment. Because I've very broadly, I work with post-colonialism. I was looking at sort of 3D scans of artifacts that are in museums, in Western museum spaces, that may be from India and might have, or South Asia, and might have problematic provenances. So because a lot of, you cannot really trace the roots of a lot of these artifacts, and they are basically colonial plunder.
Yeah.
And so I would, if the museum or institution had made the 3D scans publicly available, I was kind of downloading them and playing around with them. And then I was mixing them with colonial leaders in India during the British Raj. And so sort of making 3D collages and then 3D printing them out. So here's an example of that.
Oh, wow.
So this is Queen Victoria,
Yeah.
and this is Nataraj. I know the sort of, I would say the source of this is from India, the Nataraj. I think, and it exists in a British museum. I forget exactly which one. And then Queen Victoria as well, the bust exists at a British museum. So I have been combining them. I have a couple of other pieces that I'm working on, but generally the eyes of the colonizer is covered over by a different means. In this case, it's the sort of, this becomes the crown for Victoria. Yeah, so that's what I've been working on very recently.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful. I thank you so much for this opportunity to chat with you. It's been been great being able to come in and enjoy your work, and then now to have actually a greater understanding. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for showing my work and providing the platform. Thank you.
Yeah. So Deepanjan Mukhopadhyay's work is still on view at Buckham Gallery through March 20. Thank you again so much.